Hello, I'm Jonathan Dunksy, author of the Adam Lapid Mysteries. On this channel, I often talk about books that I read and enjoyed, and today I'm going to talk about a different sort of book than the ones I usually review on this channel. I mostly focus on crime fiction and thrillers because these are the sort of books that I myself write, but today I'm going to talk about the best Holocaust memoir that I ever read, and that is Speak You Also by Paul Steinberg. I first encountered this novel when I was researching Auschwitz in order to write my novel, The Auschwitz Detective. The Auschwitz Detective is a historical mystery set in Auschwitz in 1944. In order to write The Auschwitz Detective, I wanted to learn as much as possible about the daily life of prisoners in Auschwitz in order to paint a vivid and accurate picture for my readers. So I began watching a lot of videos of survivors and reading a lot of memoirs, and Speak You Also just happened to be one of them. I had never heard of it before I started my research. Uh, I have read other more famous memoirs, such as the one by Elie Wiesel and the one by Primo Levi. Primo Levi was an Auschwitz prisoner who wrote a famous memoir called If This Is a Man, which is also known by the name Survival in Auschwitz. And in fact, in that memoir, Primo Levi mentions Paul Steinberg. He doesn't mention him by his real name. He calls him Henri. And he describes him as a prisoner who has shed part of his humanity in order to survive in the camp. He is a prisoner who is very cunning and calculating, and he basically is willing to do anything in order to survive that ordeal. And Primo Levi sort of makes the case that he has shed a part or even all of his humanity. Speak You Also is in a way a reply to that description of Henri, of Paul Steinberg, but it doesn't seem to be the only reason why Paul Steinberg has written this memoir. I should say that Speak You Also was written about 40 to 50 years after Paul Steinberg was liberated from Auschwitz, so he wrote it with a perspective of an older man, and in a way it's just his way of giving an account of his time in Auschwitz and also of showing what it took to survive there. So I don't think it's an apology for what he had to do in order to survive there. It's just a description of what life there was like and what it took to make it out of there alive. So let me tell you a bit about the book and about Paul Steinberg and about the story, his story of survival. Paul Steinberg was a French Jew just under 17 in 1943 when he is rounded up by the Germans who are occupying France, and he is imprisoned, and after a while he is shipped east and winds up in Auschwitz, in a subcamp of Auschwitz called Monowitz. Monowitz, which was also known as Auschwitz III, was one of the largest subcamps of Auschwitz, which was not just one camp, it was made up of many small and medium and large work camps and of course, the death camps. And Monowitz was this massive work camp in which the Germans built a number of factories, and they used prisoners, mainly Jews, as slave labor in these factories. And Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi were both prisoners in Monowitz. Living conditions and working conditions in Monowitz were horrendous. In life expectancy was just a few weeks or a few months. So that a lot of people, many thousands, died in that place. And of course, if you were unable to work, the Germans would just send you to the gas chambers and murder you there. So Paul Steinberg arrives there when he's still a teenager, not even an adult, and when he arrives in Monowitz and he survives the first selection, he is deemed worthy to continue living as a slave by the Germans. Right then, on that first day, is when the first striking scene occurs. He and other prisoners are brought into a large shower room, and there they are made to take a sort of a group shower. And there the other prisoners discover that Paul Steinberg is not circumcised, as all Jewish male babies are supposed to be. And the reason is that Paul Steinberg came from a family which was decidedly unreligious. And he only had one parent, his father. His mother died in childbirth. And his father did not like him much. He did not pay him much attention. And he was unreligious, so he never circumcised Paul Steinberg, his son. And he didn't even bother to explain to him that most Jewish children, that all Jewish male children are supposed to be circumcised 8 days after they are born. And Paul Steinberg finds himself in that group shower with other prisoners who, like him, have just arrived in Monowitz, in this hellhole. And there's a sort of a gasp of astonishment as the other prisoners see him in his nakedness and see that he is not circumcised. And then one of them tells him that he is the biggest and the biggest idiot in the world, practically, because he could have used the fact that he's not circumcised to avoid being deported. He could have told the Germans, listen, there's been some mistake. I'm not Jewish at all. Look. And the Germans knew that all male Jews are circumcised. So he could have avoided being sent to Auschwitz, but he wound up there just by being naive or stupid. So he enters the camp in this place of great naivete and stupidity, but he still manages to survive because he changes completely. He becomes this cunning and sort of I wouldn't say streetwise, but campwise inmate who learns how to cut corners, get more food, get into a good work detail, sort of become friends with prisoner functionaries who were prisoners who had roles in the camp, like camp seniors and block seniors. Blocks were these massive dormitories where prisoners slept, hundreds of prisoners in that same block, same sort of dormitory, that were very crowded with hundreds of prisoners sort of wedged into them at night. So he becomes this very adept prisoner at surviving the camp, at getting more food, at not expending his energy, at ingratiating himself with prisoners who can supply him with more food, with better clothes, with anything that is needed in order to survive. The other thing that's striking about the story, which goes into great detail on daily life in Auschwitz of the prisoners, and I learned a lot from it, and it enriched my writing when I was writing The Auschwitz Detective. But the other thing that's striking, one of the things that Steinberg writes in Speak You Also, is that after a while, the prisoner population would gradually dwindle. So people would arrive in the camp after a few months. A certain portion of them would die. After another few months, more of them would die, and by a year's time, even more of them would die. And in the end, what remained was about 15% of prisoners. And this group he describes as irreducible, which means that the prisoners who survived that long knew how to live in that camp, had figured out how to survive there. They knew how to get more food, more bread, more soup. They knew how to avoid work details in which required great exertion, or had you work in inclement weather. And they knew how to operate in the camp to survive. And by being irreducible, it meant that they could have survived there for many more years because they had figured out the way to survive in Auschwitz. And the only reason why most of them didn't survive was because when the Nazis evacuated Auschwitz in January 1945, they sent the surviving prisoners west towards Germany on death marches. And many of this group, this group of irreducible prisoners, did not know how to survive the death marches. The death marches did not operate by the same rules as Auschwitz, and this is why many of them did not survive to the end of the war. But the very idea that some prisoners had figured out how the camp worked and could have lived there for a very long time was something that struck me very, very hard. It was sort of enlightening in a way, something that I did not read in any other Holocaust memoir. The thing that makes this story special, I think, is that in a way it sort of teaches you, the reader, what it took to survive in Auschwitz, and it does so in a spare, to the point and even blunt language and descriptions. And when I was reading it, I thought to myself, this is something that's totally different than other memoirs, which often talked about, hope and salvation and things that are more removed from the daily grind and the daily struggle to just survive the hell that was Auschwitz. So this is a very special book, and one that I think should be a must-read in schools and for anyone who wants to know more about what life in Auschwitz, and I imagine similarly in other concentration camps, was like for the prisoners. So this gets my highest recommendation. It is a memoir that I keep thinking about, that has stayed in my head even more than 2 years after I read it. And I know that in time I will read it again and again. So if you're interested in the Holocaust, if you want to know more about what life in Auschwitz was like for the prisoners, the real daily life of the prisoners, I highly recommend Speak You Also. You can find a link in the description below to where you can buy a copy of the book. And let me know in the comments if you read this memoir, or if you read other Holocaust memoirs that you recommend. Because I'm writing about Adam Lapid, who's a Holocaust survivor. This is my main character in the series of books that I write. I'm always looking to learn more about this time period, about this awful chapter in human history. And I think Speak You Also is one of the best books that teaches us about that time.